Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Figure Drawing Basics, part 120. It's crawling up. I am your host, and I'm going to continue on with last week's session. It's going to be more hands. I'm going to be doing more of that, talking about the process, talking about many different things in regards to staying motivated. How do you stay motivated throughout the week? So I'm going to be talking about more of that. And this is where I left off last time. So first, let's just review what went on last week. For those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time and you have no idea what you're seeing here. Well, first of all, it's a combination of really old stuff and new stuff. I'm going to leave it up to you guys to decide which is the old stuff and which is the new. But last week, I was predominantly just showing you guys how you could use this method called the block form as a way of constructing hands, as a way of constructing pretty much anything. I'm going to show you more of that here. This is an old sketchbook. I'm going to say it's at least 10 years old. Probably more. So you guys are going to see some terrible work mixed in with some new stuff like you're seeing on this page here. So this right here is a perfect example of how the block form can be used. It's excellent for perspective. So if you're drawing something beyond just front view perspective or front view characters, and you want to venture into doing 3/4 view or any perspective really, as you could see here, this is more, the camera is coming out from the bottom here, and you could see like the bottom part of the head, and the head is in 3/4 view. And by having the block form as the first stage, you can avoid a lot of time spent trying to figure out like what the right angle is, how big it's supposed to be, because really if you're starting out with a very common method when it comes to beginners by just outlining, from starting from somewhere, let's say you've been practicing eyes of a really long time and that's your beginning point, and then from there you draw the eyebrow and etc., that approach has very it almost seems limitless. Let's just put it that way. It's a limitless approach, meaning that if you start out from one part, by the time you get to the other side, you don't have any limits to tell you like, hey, this is going to go beyond what's proportionate. This is going to start looking kind of weird and wonky. So that approach is very common, but it has a lot of pitfalls. And one of them being is the fact that you don't have any limits set to know, okay, I'm going to start making if I go beyond this point, it's going to start to look warped. The figure really has very set amount of rules and guides in order for it to look proper. So once you start avoiding that, your drawing starts to break. And the block form allows you to make sure that that's there. But not only that, not only is it good for setting parameters, not only is it good for things like perspective, it's also excellent for shading. But here, I'm going to draw the head in perspective. It's going to be 3/4 view. And as you could see here, just before I get into it, this line right here indicates, okay, this is the front plane, this is the front of the face, and then from this point on, it's gonna turn into the side plane. So just to give it a better example here, this is the front and this would be the side plane right here. So planes are just areas that start to take different directions. So this is the front plane right here. This section of the forehead is the plane. Then this section, as you can see over here, that's another plane. The side of the nose is a plane. This is a plane. So just kind of think of it as like fields. Like this is a field. That's a field as well. It's just another term I'm going to say to make it easier to understand. These are just fields, and combined together in different angles, they start to create 3-dimension. They start to create form. So here we got the front plane right here. This is another plane right here. So from this point on, it starts to curve. So we're going to follow that in this example right here. And we already determined what the perspective is going to be. It's similar to this. This is another example of the same perspective, really. So camera angle is coming from the bottom here. I'm going to draw the cylinder shape as the neck, holding it together. And as you can see, it's very similar to the guides are very similar to the front view perspective. So I'm still including that, but also notice how it starts to change the direction a bit once it crosses over into the side plane right here. So the same idea though, the brows, right? So since it's perspective, the brow line is going to be a little bit angled, whereas here this is like, I'm going to say 1-point perspective. So you got the lines coming down basically towards the horizon line, but it's only going in one direction. It's only coming from here, whereas this is a 2-point perspective. There's two lines coming from this direction, and then 2 lines coming from this direction. So it's a 2-point perspective. But here it's just 1-point perspective. So because of that, the front plane is just straight. Now the side starts to take a different direction. It's horizontal to the sideline right here, so I'm going to follow that, and this is going to be the line for where the ear is going to be. So it's very similar. The eyebrow line determines where the sideline is going to be as well, and the sideline follows the top right here, the top of the box basically. And then we got another line for the eyes, which is right below the brows. Then we got the nose, and the nose is the next guide for where the ear is going to be. So I'm following that. It's going to be parallel to the line above it, and that's where the ear is going to be. Now it's a 3/4 view, so the line down the middle isn't exactly in the middle of the face. It's following the same perspective, the 3/4 perspective, and then from here you could start adding details. So we got the brows here. And just like everything else you guys have been seeing, these are all just placeholders. So once you establish the parameters, you could start defining the lines more. You could start giving more detail and attention to certain areas specifically. So the eyes are going to stay on this line right here. The tip of the nose is going to go here, and the mouth is going to go right under it. Made that a little too dark. Well, I'm not going to get too much into it, but I just wanted to show you guys how the box form, probably should do a bit bigger example for it, but how it helps in order to construct a head and to making sure that things do line up, that they do look proportionate and perspective. So this is just like a quick demonstration of that. But last week I was predominantly using it for drawing the hands. As you can see, it's like written or drawn all over the page, and that's kind of the goal here, is to make sure that I cover up as much as possible. You know, utilize the space while I'm practicing, and get used to colliding objects, colliding drawings, because if you're drawing, let's say, a comic book and you're drawing characters next to each other, you want to make sure that it looks right, and that's not going to be something that is completely new to you, you know. So I think a lot of people who are just starting out to draw, they want to centralize whatever it is that they're drawing, and that's something that's pretty common when it comes to beginners. So you want to kind of break that habit. Let me see if I could fit that in here. I'm going to do a quick. Well, this is going to be colliding for sure, but I'm going to go along with it because the drawing above is an old drawing, and really it's a waste of space. At this point, I'd rather dedicate it to practicing these hands. So I'm going to use like the rectangle shape to kind of define this area right here. The fingers are curling, so you're not going to see them completely, but just for the time being, to just give myself an idea of like, well, how long are they supposed to be? How long is this section supposed to be? I'm again using a very simple shape, not to get into too much detail. And then from there, I could start dividing them. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Should be 4 fingers, obviously. Whoops. Talk about colliding. going right through this drawing. But get comfortable doing that. It's your sketchbook. Treat it like a sketchbook. You know, I don't think you should be looking at your sketchbook as a place for finalized, beautiful drawings. You know, it's kind of, you want to have you want to have space for you to be able to experiment and do whatever and feel comfortable with making mistakes. That's number one, I think. Getting really comfortable with making mistakes, getting comfortable with failures, and working through them. You know, you don't want to be paralyzed by them. You don't want to be disheartened by them. You want to just recognize them for what they are, just opportunities to see where you need to improve, you know, what you need to do to get better. So in a place where you're making a bunch of mistakes, you could look back and you could be like, I need to do, let's say I need to draw, well, hands better, or I need to draw the eyes better, or I need to understand perspective better. And it's through these failures that you start to notice, okay, where do I begin to improve, you know, to learn, and so on and so forth. I think that's the healthiest way to approach the learning process. And it becomes useful in many other instances. I mean, throughout your entire artistic journey, if you get comfortable with that, you can push yourself through any of the difficulties that are going to arise. Because I'll tell you, even if you are intermediate or advanced, you're still going to face these things, because you're always going to want to push things to the next level. You know, you're going to notice certain things that as you get better, you're like, oh, this could be done, you know, this can be done to improve the drawing, or so on and so forth, or I don't like how this came out. And that's gonna, instead of like feeling disheartened or inadequate, you could be like, okay, now I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna try to do a better job, and overcome this hurdle, overcome this problem that I'm facing. I'm going to draw another arm, or another hand rather. Let's see. And I'm kind of doing them all different sizes. You know, I am working from a reference, so for me, I'm trying to vary the size. It shows up in one size, and I'm trying to make sure that I understand it in order for me to be able to scale it down or up to whatever I feel is necessary. So I'm just going to continue doing that. So here I'm going to collide again. I'm going to draw over this gentleman's ear, this wonky looking guy. So something I went over, and I'm going to review again today, about drawing hands. One of the things that you should absolutely notice is how the fingers form when they curl. It may seem, you know, just at a quick glance that all the fingers line up and they're perfectly parallel to each other, or they're straight, when in fact it really isn't. If you take a closer look, you'll notice how this section right here, it curls. So as it goes further and further down, towards where the pinky is, it starts to curl more and more and more. As far as the fingers go, towards the inside, notice how the pinky is going inwards, it's not staying parallel to all the other lines. It's tucking itself in with the rest of the fingers instead of going outwards. And I'll show you guys that briefly once I finish this sketch right here. I'm going to give you a better understanding of it visually to see what I'm talking about. It's an exercise that I did last week and the week before called Do's and Don'ts. So since today is Monday, we're starting it fresh. There are new viewers. I think it's helpful to just kind of review that. It's a really important it's an important lesson if you're drawing hands, to keep you focused and for you to recognize early on what are some of the pitfalls, what are the common mistakes that people make. But I think best of all is to just push yourself to see as much detail within the lines as possible, and pay attention to the angle, pay attention to the space between objects, between lines. Let's just say, like when you're drawing and you're using a reference, and let's say you're drawing this section right here, pay attention to the space between the right side of the fingers and the left side, and notice, like, well, how thick is it, in comparison to the reference that you're drawing from, and try to nail it down exactly as you see it. The purpose isn't to copy it, or to draw the drawing exactly as it is. The purpose is to become more and more sensitive to detail. So you're kind of getting two things done there. You're getting the drawing done and making it look really pristine, but predominantly you're teaching yourself how to pay attention to detail, recognizing, like, oh, the fingers are going inwards towards the end. They're not exactly parallel to each other. That sort of thing allows you to become more accurate, and it helps you with learning, because the more sensitive you are to all these little details, the more you're going to pick up and notice, like, okay, this is something that's really common, so on and so forth. And it's going to help you build your visual library, basically. You're going to notice all these little things that improve your drawing drastically. All right, so I'm done with this drawing. I'm not going to spend way more time on it just yet. I'm going to get back to it in a few. I do want to go over these do and don'ts that I was just mentioning. As a quick recap. Sketchbook is predominantly done. But I just see so much space wasted that I'm just going to continue filling it up as much as possible. Where are you, do's and don'ts? I know you're here somewhere. Just kind of hopped around in the beginning. Coming from my previous sketchbook, it took me some time to get used to the quality of this paper, so I just searched for empty pages, or pages that don't have such so many marks on there, because it's very transparent, it's very light, and I really don't like that. But now I'm kind of getting used to it, and I figured, screw it, let me just there you go. I think it was towards the back. All right, so here, this be it. There's another one that really talks about the fingers that way. What I was mentioning earlier. Somewhere here. So this is page 1 of the do's and don'ts. Page 2. Yeah, I'm going to say that's page 2. So just pay attention here real quick. Notice how it's the same, right? But what's different is what I was talking about before. Notice how the pinky here, it's kind of following the same direction as the other fingers. Whereas here you could see that the pinky is going inwards. And the biggest way you can recognize that, the most obvious way you can recognize it, is something else I mentioned earlier, comparing the space between objects. So the object here being the pinky, and just paying attention to that and to the outer line of the palm. So just notice that here. So the pinky and the outer line of the palm. Notice how much of a gap there is between here as opposed to here. So this would be the right way to go about it. This is the way to actually, that your hand actually looks when you're forming that fist. So that's one of the do's and don'ts. There's another one down here which just shows how it's kind of stiff here, right? You're looking at it, it may be somewhat believable for you to hold something, but this looks more natural. Holding the cup in this manner is more natural. You're allowing it to actually rest on your palm as opposed to holding it as if though it's some sort of concoction that's going to burn you or something. You know, you're barely holding it to kind of keep as much distance as possible. This looks a little bit natural. All right, so then jumping back to more do's and don'ts. Do form, as I was talking about earlier, form using the block form. It's really helpful in perspective, as you can see, when it comes to the fingers, especially because there's so many animated objects on the palm itself, right? There's like so much going on, and they're all protruding out, you know, and they're all just very flexible. And when it comes to the perspective with all that in mind, things can get even more complicated. So using the block form, it allows you to build from there, you know, one block at a time, to eventually constructing it and making sure that it's proportionate in relationship to each other, and just in general, it takes the proper shape. So from there, once you establish that, you get the perspective down, you get the angles down, you get the anatomy down. From there, you could start shaping it more and turning it into a more believable rather than a mechanical looking drawing. Another really helpful thing here is because you reveal planes, you can figure out where the nail is supposed to be, which is incredibly important. It shows perspective. The nail itself shows the perspective and reveals certain areas, like this area right here. It's revealed because you drew the nail in perspective, whereas here, as you could see, it's totally against the perspective. If the hand is to the side, as you see here, the nail wouldn't be facing the camera like as you see it here on my finger here. It would be to the side. But this suggests the combination of both, which doesn't make any sense. So it kind of breaks the drawing immediately. It kind of looks amateur. And this is just an example of how people usually just start out by, you know, doing the exterior and just kind of building from there and eventually finishing up the drawing. You're going to fall into these pitfalls. You know, you're going to have these errors done. Whereas if you try to approach it more technically, you learn the right way of doing it, and the right way becomes instilled in your memory, in your visual memory. So every time you sit down to draw, you're going to it's going to just come to you naturally. You're going to want to fix it because your eye has gotten used to seeing it in its proper form, in the proper proportion, and you're going to want to do that. And that's kind of how it works eventually. You know, you instill or ingrain in your memory proportions and visually how they look right, so that you could recall them at any time. Like intuitively, they just come to you. The same way as words now, because you took the time to understand them, you took the time to spell them out right. You know, you look up the definition, you've written them multiple times. Now you don't have to do all those steps in order to understand what the word is. It just naturally comes to you. You know, you've ingrained it into your like instinctive memory, basically. So the same thing happens here, but it's done through images rather than letters and words and definitions. You instinctively start to correct yourself because you learn the proper form. One example I can give you is if you don't understand the definition of a word, and each time you use it, you're going to use it out of context, you know, or it won't make any sense in sentence structure. So if you don't learn the proper definition of it, you're going to keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, just going to make less and less sense. But if you teach yourself the definition, you learn it properly, whenever you do recall it, whenever you encounter it, you're going to know exactly what it means and you're going to use it properly. So the same thing here. You learn the proper form, you learn what it looks like anatomically, what it looks like proportionally, what it looks like in perspective. And when it comes down to it, and you'll see it, whether it's from your sketch or something, you're going to automatically just correct it, and you're going to be like, okay, it's actually supposed to look like this. So teach yourself good habits. Start out learning the right way to go about stuff, so that way you don't have to correct yourself later. You get used to, let's say, and this is something that I see so often, people drawing it incorrectly. Let's say they draw it like this, and then they go and they really get into a lot of detail, and they shade and do all this stuff. But because it's broken, because the perspective, like for example, they never fixed the nail because they'd never really seen it in its proper placement according to the perspective, it still stays there. So it's a really well-defined broken drawing, and it just kind of signals that to everybody. So you want to make sure you avoid that. So do and don't there. Do define areas. So this is an example, the same thing you're seeing here. Everything is kind of rounded off, right? It looks like somebody got like a rubber glove and they just blew into it, and it just kind of folds over. There's no bones, there's nothing, no joints to kind of keep it in place. In this example, everything is kind of smooth. Whereas here, because you're paying attention, this is something I was talking about earlier, because you're paying attention to little details, there's actually a little bump right there to indicate that's where the joint is. This is where the fold is. I'm going to draw these lines right here that indicate folds. I'm going to draw these lines right here to indicate a little bit of shadow. Paying attention to those little details transforms your drawing into being more believable. So where in this example everything is kind of rounded, we're actually defining joints more. You could see that there's a little bit more definition here. There's more definition in this area of the joint, as well as the knuckles. I'm adding the knuckles here, whereas here it's just kind of like a smooth surface all around. The variation within palm right here, you notice how the line kind of dips in and dips out and comes around. All that makes a huge difference, as you could see. So pretty quick synopsis of like do and don't for this example. Here, this is another thing that people don't really pay attention to. The thumb isn't attached to the palm. It's actually attached to another joint right here that is attached to the palm. So it's not part of the palm. Let me just say, or rephrase it, it's not part of the palm, it's attached to it through this other joint right here. So don't draw it that way. As you could see in this example, the thumb is just kind of like within the palm itself in this example, so that's a don't. Whereas here you could see it swings open. It goes inwards and then swings open and extends itself with this section right here. It's a really important little detail. Another do, which is to round, to make sure that you pay attention to the arch that forms at the tip of the fingers, as well as the arch that forms at the base of the fingers. It's not just straight. It doesn't just go straight across. Another great way of doing it is just test it using a ruler. This is a straight line, and look at that. I'm going to use it from the pinky. It's obviously not the case. Same thing here. It's not going straight across. So this is an example of what people sometimes do. If they're trying to simplify things, they're simplifying the wrong things, and it ends up looking weird. This looks like a cardboard cutout of some sort. No variation there when it comes to the thumb itself. Like, notice how there's some important detail here to indicate indentation and such, whereas here it's just kind of like a popsicle stick. And so are the fingers. They're just kind of like popsicle sticks, no variation to them, no arch all the fingers are about the same size aside from the most obvious one, which is the pinky. So you want to avoid making that mistake as well. And here, the final example, I'm going to get back to drawing them from beginning to end. In this final example, you could see it's pretty much the same idea here. The knuckles, they curve. They don't go just straight across. And the same thing with the tips of the fingers. As the fingers come together into a close, they tend to bunch up into one another, as opposed to just being incredibly parallel and uniformed and such. Same thing with the knuckles. And to people who have an untrained eye, it might not seem that obvious, but once you get used to seeing things with more detail, then you start to pick up on stuff like this. You really start to pay attention to curvature. You start to pay attention to the angles of whatever it is that you're drawing. All right, so that pretty much sums it up. That's a really important lesson there. Some things to look out for. But as I mentioned, you don't want to just learn the lessons and draw based on what the lessons are saying. You want to teach yourself how to see little details. And that requires patience. That requires kind of taking a pause, and studying something, not trying to speed things up, not trying to be incredibly fast. That's not really the goal. You get fast by getting a better understanding of what you're drawing and drawing it over and over and over again. That's really the best way to go about it. Trying to find where I left off. I believe it was in the front. Where are you? Well, that was the box example, the block example. It is here somewhere. Okay, this is it right here. So something I talked about earlier, I was mentioning how do you stay motivated? You realize there's so much to learn. I have so much to do. It could be disheartening, right? And it can be overwhelming. It could be frustrating because you're just like, oh, I'm so far behind. It's kind of like, what starts to creep in and becomes toxic is once you start looking at it as some sort of competition, or it's some sort of race, really. That's really when things start to head south. You don't want to look at it as a race. You don't want to look at it in a way of everybody else had such a head start and now I am just beginning, so I'm going to finish the race so late. It's almost like I have no chance of catching up to them. Think of it in those terms. That is crippling. That's not how you want to approach anything. When it comes to learning something new, that is not a state of mind that you want to be in. It's very easy to fall into that, considering especially our social culture and the way people interact is always a reminder that that's how things are, and how things are doesn't mean that that's how they should be or whether it's right. There's a lot of things that people do in modern day that is considered to be as how things are, and you just wouldn't really support that. By supporting it, you're enabling it and you're perpetuating it. So you have to look outside of that, and you have to really stand your ground on the way things should be and pushing for that to be the case. So anyways, just going back to this, you don't want to get into that state of mind, especially when it comes to learning to draw. It's not a race. You're not trying to finish first. It's not about that. That's what a race is really about. It's about finishing first and winning, whatever. This isn't about that. This is about you learning a skill. This is about you improving, getting better, and using this skill to express yourself and your ideas and so on and so forth. You're really up against yourself here. So it's best not to compare. It's best not to say, oh, well, I'm so behind. There's so much to learn, and I'm never going to finish. The thing is, when it comes to art, when it comes to drawing, or any field for that matter, music, writing, there is no finish line. You're always going to feel like there's more to do, there's more to learn. So it's very important to just get used to that, to getting used to that suggestion. So how do you stay motivated? What do you do to continue to improve, to get better, to push yourself to practice? Well, one of the best things I could tell you, the number one advice, and I'll go into other things after, the number one advice I can give you is you just do it. The way you wake up and you brush your teeth every day, you don't rationalize it, you don't think about it. Should I do it today? Should I not do it today? You have to do it. So it's almost kind of mindless. You have to sit down. When it comes to drawing, you just have to sit down, pick up your pencil, open up the book without thought, without consideration to how you feel, whether you're motivated, unmotivated, feeling despair, feeling anxious, whatever. You don't even give that a moment of thought. You just blank out on any of it. You blank your mind, and you just focus on a goal to sit and draw. And then once you pick up the pencil, once you start learning this stuff, and you really get into it, completely drop everything that's in your mind, clear it out. There's nothing right now that's more important than you and your pencil and your sketchbook and whatever the subject is that you're studying. That's it. And just sit and get into it. You're now in this zone. It's kind of like getting into a movie, right? When you sit down, you watch a movie, you're enamored by it. You're in with the characters, you focus on what's going on. And that hour and a half is just about that movie. So the same thing here, except you're doing something incredibly great for yourself. You're learning a skill. You're getting better at something. So, you kind of have to approach it in that manner. And then once you sit down and you start doing it, you're going to recognize, like, well, first of all, you're going to congratulate yourself because you overcame a hurdle. A really, really important point. It's like the number one biggest part of procrastination is people not sitting down and doing what they're supposed to or where they should be. They're just kind of procrastinating. They're pretending like that they will get to it eventually because they're trying to feel that moment of inspiration, that kick in the butt, that drive that says, you got to sit and do this, or I feel really inspired, I'm going to sit and do it. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to learning a skill. But eventually, the more and more you do it, the more results, the better results you're going to get, the more accomplishments you're going to have, the less of that sort of process it's going to be, and you're just going to do it. You're going to want to sit down and practice this stuff. It's not going to be such a battle, or such a reluctant sort of approach. You're just going to want to create more stuff, to come up with more ideas. So that's my number one advice. Just do it. It's like that Nike's commercial. I'm not for Nike. I don't even own any of their stuff, but I guess it serves its purpose by just saying, just do it. And then eventually you'll make it a habit. It's just something that you're going to do. Or even if not, that's going to be your habit when it comes to you sitting down and learning something. But for me personally, that's been the case. And once I would just tell myself, like, just go and sit down, don't even think about it, and I would start doing it, I would feel so good at the end of the day. And even while I'm doing it, knowing that I've overcome that hurdle, I'm actually sitting and practicing and drawing and coming up with new concepts and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the day, when you're just going to recap, what have you done today? You're going to know, well, you've done the most important thing. You actually sat down and studied and improved on this stuff. You learned something new. You had a good time. You didn't give into procrastination. It wasn't another failed day of not getting things done. And that's motivating. That's also a great feeling at the end of the day, knowing that you've done what you were supposed to. So that's one way. That's one way of approaching motivation. That question about how do you stay motivated. The next one is, I'm going to say, a little bit more easygoing and more fun. I'm going to say and they're all important. I'm not going to say one is a substitute for another. I think you just have to combine all those things together. And that's just by surrounding yourself by what you're into. So if you're into comics, you want to draw comics, post them on the wall. Have a bunch of comics and then just pin them to the wall. Surround yourself with them as a way to remind yourself, or to just be inspired by them. Have them be in a forefront. Visually being like, hey, this is where I want to be, so I got to sit down and draw. Or looking at some really cool comic book cover, that could really motivate you and to draw it, for example. Maybe you want to sit down and finish studying that comic book cover of yours. So that's kind of like a more basic one, right? If you're on social media, have a bunch of illustrators that you follow, and make that your primary focus. So that way, when you open it up, you see all that stuff. It can keep you inspired. It could motivate you to draw as well. But most importantly, just sitting down and drawing. All right, let's see. Do I want to just keep going, like just drawing all around this face? I think I'm going to do just that, actually. I'm going to do another one right here. So I'm going to use a big shape. For the fingers, it's kind of like a square, I'm going to say. I'm going to use like a cylinder shape or like a rectangular shape for this other finger. It's going to be up here. So I'm looking at the subject and I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. Okay, so we got the basic shapes down. We set the parameters. I paid attention to the space between objects to make sure everything is right. So it's like a pencil that is being held. I'm gonna draw through these fingers that I drew in order to make sure that the object is connected all the way through properly. Okay, now that that's established, I'm just gonna start defining things little by little. Okay, so that's kind of there, right? This is like a... Whoops. I'm gonna move it down a little bit. So that's just like a draft there. And now I'm going to start spending a little bit more time defining it. Refining it, rather. And if you guys have any anything that you're going through, you know, mentally, what are some of the things that present themselves as roadblocks for you before you get a chance to sit down and draw? Talk about it in chat. Bring it up. That's something that we can discuss. You can get perspective on, and to kind of make it easier or alleviate yourself of that. By seeing how many other people could relate to it. You know, what are other people's experiences when it comes to this subject that you got in mind? Getting into the nail, really can't tell you how important the nail is when it comes to drawing hands. You can create all the detail that you want, but if the nail looks wrong, forget it. And you can't avoid it, really. You know, you can't avoid the nails. If you're drawing the hands, there's going to be points where you're going to need to draw like a zoomed in perspective on the hands, and you don't want it to be crippled, you know. You don't want to be crippled. You don't want to be like, oh, when it comes to that, I want to avoid that. You want to learn how to draw it properly so that when it comes up, you're not going to feel intimidated or look for shortcuts. You'll know exactly what to do to make it look good. So tackle your problem head on. Don't sweep it under the rug. So I'm gonna do a little bit of detail here, and I'm gonna have to call it a night for Figure Drawing Basics, everybody. But I will be back. I'm gonna be taking a quick 5-minute break and getting ready for the next stream, which is gonna be drawing comics. I look forward to it every week. I'm gonna be continuing to draw Conan the Barbarian. This is John Buscema's work. Goal is to draw the comic book from cover to cover, really, every single panel, and learn from it, practice all sorts of stuff, and really just immerse myself in the world of John Buscema's work. Absolutely love it. I love the story. I love the characters and how he draws them. I like the action that's in them. It's a real treat to be able to do that every week. So stick around for that. I'll be right back. If you guys do enjoy this content, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. It's greatly appreciated. And I'll see you guys in the next stream. Hello viewers, welcome to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Drawing Comics part 45. I am your host, and I'm going to continue working on Conan the Barbarian. This is John Buscema's work. This is where I left off last week. And I'm going to be building on this last panel right here. I'm gonna say I'm like more than halfway done with this comic. Well, as far as like penciling goes, I have yet to go back to even my old sketchbook. I got a bunch of panels there and start inking. And recently, I have decided to move away from this tool right here. While it is great for certain things, like for example, if you are nowhere near a desk, let's say you're doing this outside, right? You're sitting somewhere, you're sitting and drawing from real life or something, and you want to ink it. So this is perfect for that because you don't need to have like the bottle there of ink for you to be able to like dip your brush into and clean things or whatever. This is all just kind of like on the go sort of thing. It's useful for that. That's kind of what I'm going to turn to this tool for. But what I don't like about it is that you have to like clean it regularly, like, and the ink dries inside of it. So it's a bit of a hassle. There's a couple of steps that you have to take in order to be able to make it functional, whereas when it just comes to using a regular brush, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to clean. It's a lot easier to refill because all you just need one of these. Where is it? There you go. Bombay Black India ink, and you just could drip that in and dip your ink, your brush into it, and there you go. You got fresh ink. And just looking back at a lot of these comic book artists back in the day, and that's what they used. They didn't have any special tools or anything like that. They just used a regular brush. And they got incredible amount of detail. Like, just looking at any of this stuff right here. Granted, this is kind of smaller. I'm going to say it's a little bit smaller than comic book paper, because comic book paper measures out to be like 14 by... I'm going to say like 14 or 16 by 11. I don't remember exactly what the size for it is, but it's a lot bigger, so you got a lot more space in order to be able to draw bigger panels. So little detail isn't as small as you would see on here. But yeah, they would get really fine lines. Like just looking at the shadows that are on his bicep, there's a mixture of all sorts of lines from thin to thick, and that's all done with a brush. So kind of want to achieve that level of ability when it comes to using a brush. There's just a lot of stuff that's being sold that's kind of unnecessary. It's just kind of like capitalism in a nutshell. Selling you a bunch of shit you don't need. That ends up contributing towards environmental disasters, ecological disasters, disease, all that other stuff, simply because, people want a Go-Gurt or something. I recently saw an ad that said, no time to have dinner, no problem. And of course, it's some sort of like plastic made container with some food that's overly processed. So the solution isn't to actually give people the time to eat, to have energy to work. The solution is to give them stuff that they can, shovel in their mouth real quick so that they can come back and serve a greedy company that refuses to give them livable wages. Because I'm going to say that most people who are on that sort of go aren't really working office jobs. Office jobs that have a little bit more leniency as far as time goes and such. Those are people who are being exploited for their time and hard work. And rather than actually having that fixed, companies are like, buy this other thing that's really going to give bosses more time with your labor. Well, you get old. And the thing is, it's just going to escalate. Until people band together and they shut down the economy demanding change, it's just going to escalate because they're going to see like, oh, there's resistance. We got to put more pressure on them and make things even more unlivable and unbearable so that way they cave in. They cave in to our greed and our corruption and our destruction. And all that. Our exploitation, our desire for you to die off while making us profits. I mean, I haven't forgotten the fact that they demanded people to go back to work at the peak of the pandemic before any vaccines were available. I haven't forgotten about that. And did any of the politicians in power do anything about that? The ones who claim that they're for the people? I mean, they're serving a system that basically is at a gridlock. And it's going to be a gridlock starting next year as well. Well, in January. January 3rd, to be very specific, it's going to be another gridlock. What do I mean by that? Well, it's going to be the 118th Congress in play. And that's going to be a majority for the Nazis in the House of Representatives, which is not what the case is right now. Right now, the House of Representatives have a Democratic majority. But starting January 3rd, it's going to be the opposite. And then the Senate, right, that's the other chamber. That's what makes up the House of Congress. It's two chambers. It's the House of Representatives and the Senate combined together that make up Congress. So once that's going to be put in play starting January the 3rd, it's going to be the Senate, which has not a Democratic majority, as people want to believe or think is going to be the case. There's Manchin and there's Sinema. Both of those people are actually Republicans. They're just in disguise. They're put in play over there so that whenever the Nazis don't want to send a bill that disfavors them, they get these people to vote no. So it never really passes the House. It doesn't get passed on to the Senate for the Senate to sign anything. So now they have that in the Senate. They have these two political members in there who are going to favor the Nazi party, basically. And they're going to be like, here, no, we're not going to sign for that. Give us more money so we make sure we don't do that. Stuff their pockets with it. Of course, they got lobbyists as well for companies and corporations that don't want certain laws that are going to disfavor their profits. So none of these politicians that are for the people are going to get anything done starting next year. It's going to be the more of the same. You're going to see headlines. They're going to be like, this really important bill is on the table for discussion, and people are debating about it. Is it going to pass? And then like months later, after like quote unquote some debating, they're going to be like, nope, it's not going to pass. Nobody voted for it. We didn't have enough votes to actually pass it onto the Senate for it to be signed. And then if it does, for whatever reason, which it won't, it's going to be passed off to the Senate, and the Senate needs to vote, have the vote majority there. So if the Democrats, for example, have the majority, it has to be more than 50 votes. But with those two in play, it's going to bring things down to 49. So right now the prediction is 51 to 49. But with Manchin and Sinema, and I'm sure there's other Democrats who were pawns, basically, who are capitalist fascist pawns, and who are easily bought out with a bunch of money, they're also going to vote no. So if the House of Representatives passes a bill to the Senate, then the Senate is also going to say no. So it's a deadlock. Like, nothing is going to get passed, and the economy is just going to keep getting worse. It's going to favor people with a bunch of money, and your life, if you're not one of those, is just going to get more and more miserable. You're going to be under the thumb of all these fat corporations who basically want to keep exploiting you, while trying to sell that you're living in a free nation, and you're here like in a democracy and freedom of choice and all that other stuff. It doesn't apply to people. They're just talking about the rich here. And that's pretty much it. Your average everyday person is just exploitation, basically. It's money in the pockets of really rich people. And that's pretty much it. And it's just going to continue to get worse. You know, more people, more fascism is going to grow. And the only thing that we can do, which has been proven to be effective in other countries as well, in countries that have a lot more of an oppressive regime going on, is by protesting. If 1,000 people, just 1,000 people even, march through the streets day after day after day demanding livable wages, demanding less hours of work while having livable wages, demanding things like student loan forgiveness. That should have been done a long time ago, you know. It would be just as effective. Iran has been protesting for months, and now they've abolished the morality police. I mean, they have so much more work to do. I don't think that they should stop there. There's a lot more to do to improve their economy and their social structure, basically. But it just goes to show how effective that is. Because really, they need us, you know, us, the working people, us who aren't part of the 1% or whatever. They need us. We don't need their business. We can create other businesses, you know, people who are siding with the people, they can create businesses. And I think that's one of the most important steps, is people who are for the people, who have money, who believe in democracy, who believe in diversity and a better future. They need to invest and create jobs that are maintained, that are owned by progressive and democratic people. You know, and I think supply chains, because that's another roadblock, right? Because if you create a business and all the supply chains are owned by fascists, they're going to create a roadblock there. They're going to make it so overwhelmingly expensive that you won't be able to have the right wages or whatever. But I think that government budget should go into play. I mean, look at the defense bill that recently popped up. Trillions of dollars. Like almost beyond. And where's that money coming from? It's all of our taxes. That's all the taxes that are being funneled into that. There's a lot of corruption there. It's absolutely a bunch of corruption. It's abuse of our taxes. So instead of actually using that money to pay teachers livable wages, to pay just livable wages, excellent wages, we want to have teachers who are excited to go in and teach kids progressive ways of dealing with problems, whether it's psychological relationships or whatever it is. That kind of sets up the future. That sets up how people are going to interact with each other, whether they're going to be able to problem solve, how they're going to problem solve, how they're going to create businesses and make them functional. Like, it all really depends on the education of the future. So yeah, paying teachers great wages, also upping their standard, having a psychology degree so that they can approach all forms of learning. They can approach things like, somebody who is falling behind. How do you go about that? Figuring that out. Having a class that requires people to interact with one another and come up with and talk about different ways of dealing with issues, whether it's interpersonal, family related, teaching people values and talking about different scenarios and being like, well, what would happen if a person did this? What are the outcomes of that? And just that sort of like debating sort of class, I think, should be a requirement. Social interaction should be a requirement, just like all the other things. If we have like a gym class, that's a requirement. Why not have a social interaction class? Talking about things like sexism and what that's been like in history and what kind of problems it created and why, etc. Like, really just getting into these interactive issues that we have, social interactive issues that we've faced. That's where it really starts to get eliminated, is in the education system. So yeah, teachers should have better degrees when it comes to that. Psychology degree, talking about interpersonal skills, interaction skills, conversational skills, like all that really shapes the future, shapes how people treat each other, how they see each other. But instead, all that money is being poured into defense bills because they don't want a good education. They don't want you to be smart. I mean, there's a school multiple schools that have been shut down in Philadelphia because it saves the district, the politicians of that district. It saves them millions of dollars. So they close down these schools rather than figuring out, well, how do we improve education for the people here and make things better? They're closing them down instead. Because who are they going to have left to blame if things are going to go wrong? Who are they going to have to blame or use in order to save money and stuff it in their pockets and the pockets of their interests, if there's nobody to blame? If people are educated and they have great opportunities and such, they won't. When you have a culture that predominantly, what they've been told, what they've been taught, what their generation, the older people of their generation have taught them, survival of the fittest. When you have an entire generation of people, old people, who are perpetuating it by teaching young kids this concept and telling them, well, this is what the game is. This game, that's what they call people's lives, which is very much a sociopathic way of looking at things. When they're teaching that to their kids, what are the kids going to do? They're going to go and teach that to other kids, and they're going to teach that to their kids. So it's just perpetuating this Nazi concept that makes things unsustainable, that makes things more and more violent and crazy, and perpetuates all the wars and terrible social interaction, because it also allows them to create wars and profit from them. So it's a sickness. It's a sickness that corrupts everything, that destroys everything for the sake of more power, for the sake of more money. It's absolutely not sustainable. And that's not the kind of future that we want to build. As a society, as people, we have to move away from that, and we have to start getting more progressive, enjoyable society, a society where people can interact with one another and enjoy each other, rather than constantly being at war with one another because of these old Nazi fart principles and values that are being passed down over and over and over again. You think all these young people, they most of them are just perpetuating stuff because they're trust fund kids too. They're the parents they have Nazi values, and they tell them well, if you support, if you vote, or if you believe in what we believe in, well, you're going to get this trust fund, you're going to get these opportunities, you're going to make this money. It's not young people who are the problem, it's the old people. They're the ones perpetuating it. I mean, look at Congress. That's predominantly just old white people who were born during the time of the Nazi regime, and considering a lot of them actually supported it, well, they're the ones making decisions now. They're the ones who are trying to decide your future. And the thing about all this is that, does anybody know what happens once we're gone? Nobody knows that. So they're playing a game with your life that you don't know if you're going to have a chance to live. And I think that we need to take action. We can't allow sociopaths and psychopaths play these games with this reality that we don't know what the outcome of it is going to be, And the only way to do it is direct action. As I mentioned, if you're going to depend on a political system that has a gridlock right now, and it's going to have another gridlock for the next 4 years, or even 2 years, let's just say it's going to be 2 years for a re-election again. Of course, they're going to pull more stunts to prevent any sort of failure, as they see, on their part, or failing all the lobbyists and corporations that are pouring money into them. Of course, they're going to pull more stunts to do it. So maybe in the next 2 years, or after these 2 years, things might be getting better. No. Maybe in 4 years. That's 4 years of your life that you're putting in the hands of people who are just corrupt. Who knows if that's really going to change anything. We can't be bystanders. We have to actually start doing things, and the only way to do it is to protest. And that's something that happened back in That's something that happened back in the 1800s. If you question, where did the 8 hours come from? What happened? Who decided that? Why is it considered to be 8 hours? Well, really, it's because it used to be 11 to 13 hours. and they had child labor. So like kids were like 6, well, not 6, I don't know, I'm gonna say 8, 9, 10 were working in factories. This is like back where the Industrial Revolution just started, and like they started using automation for production. Yeah, like that was common practice. Really abusive and insane working conditions. It used to even be 6 times a week. These are the type of people. They're mentally sick people. And how that changed to 8 hours was people eventually had enough. They're like, no, we want to enjoy our life. Like, we're not going to just work, eat, sleep, and die. You know, we want to actually have time to explore, to live, to experience, to enjoy things. And they came together, and they started demanding 8 hours and living wages. As a new standard. And of course that was rejected. Of course there were a bunch of Nazis who were just like, oh, that's just going to cause more problems, and you know, the economy is going to crash, and blah 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 blah, and you know, oh, inflation, and you don't know what you're talking about, and blah, you know, all the stuff that you're basically seeing now. Everything that you're seeing now, all the retorts that are coming from them, all the, you know, all the Nazi gaslighting bullshit that's coming from them, that was present back then, without a doubt. Even worse, I would imagine. But people banded together, they protested, and when they were met with a bunch of no's, they shut down the economy. That's exactly what happened. They shut down the economy. It all collapsed. And all the people who were exploiting people, they started to panic because all their businesses, everything was just going downhill. So if we want to see change, that's going to be for the people. We have to come together, and we have to protest consecutively. It can't be just like once and that's it, because of course they're going to suspect that. Of course they're going to know that, oh, it's going to happen once, we just have to deal with it and that's it. No, it has to be consistent, as you saw in Iran, the way that they were doing it for months. And the best way to go about it is to have groups. So you got, let's say, group A, it has like 1,000 people, and they protest, and then group B comes in, they take over that time slot and they protest, and group C comes in, and each one of them is like 1,000 people, and they just keep rotating. So group A could go back and rest and take care of things, then group B comes in, they take over, etc., etc., etc. That's the best way to go about it. You know, we have to show that we make up the economy, we make their profits. Without us, no profits. There's nothing that they could do to make that money back. Absolutely not. So we as the people have to come together and demonstrate that and show that, you're screwing with our life, basically. You're screwing with our ability to exist and experience and enjoy ourselves because you just like money. Because you have this mental sickness. And that's not going to fly with us. You know, we have to come together to do it. There's absolutely no other alternative to this. It's just getting worse and worse. And they're going to continue to do that. You know, they want to put the pressure on. They've been working to make sure people are divided, you know, by making this like competitive culture where people are undermining each other, outdoing each other, proving to be superior, inferior, better than, less than, you know, that whole garbage. That's what they've been doing. They've been doing it to divide people so that people are, you know, undermining each other, cutting each other off, proving themselves to be better than others. And that's like the corporate ladder climbing approach, you know, that people commend that. That's commendable. And that's what they've been doing. It's a trap. It's a way to have less people band together, have people resent each other. You know, that's perfect. How are they going to come together when that's the culture? That's how you interact with one another. And that's one of the reasons why that is perpetuated. Aside from the fact that that's what they were taught when they were younger. They were brainwashed just the same way to believe that. They were conditioned to believe that. So it's just perpetuating that same idea. And we have to see through that. We have to realize, like, hey, we're getting brainwashed here, and we're being used and divided for this reason. I mean, I think one of the most important things, aside from obviously having more time to yourself and having livable wages, is restructuring the school system. Teaching, as I was mentioning, teaching kids how to interact with one another in a progressive manner, in a way that doesn't include these like Nazi values and behaviors. As I mentioned, having classes that discuss all sorts of social scenarios. What if this happens? Like, what is the best way to look about it? To see it? What's the best way to deal with that? Family scenarios. Having great guidance counselors, get great therapists. There's definitely kids who come from broken homes, abusive homes, drug addicted and alcohol abusing homes. Like, that's absolutely the case. And those kids need perspective. You might not reach them completely, but at least giving them some sort of perspective outside of like the toxic environment that they're in. And that's sometimes what you kind of need, in order to create that change within a person, is for them to actually see something beyond what's just what they're surrounded by. I think one of the best examples of that is like the idea of people coming into existence with a flashlight and just seeing one direction with that light. That's all they're seeing. And then having somebody else come along with a flashlight and shine the light towards another direction that they've seen themselves in. And now this person has two. So if they never gotten that experience of that other person with their flashlight and them showing them a different path, they would have just continued. Like, how do they know? They don't know. So they know what's there and what they could follow. And that's pretty much it. So guidance counselors, therapists that are in schools are those flashlights, basically, in different perspectives. And that's what I was talking about, having like restructured schools, having schools that have teachers who are paid really well because they have, well, first of all, because they had to go to college and they had to study all this stuff and make sure that it was worth the time and worth the money in order to keep pursuing it. But right now, teachers who are going into college to learn all this stuff, they're not getting paid well coming out. So it's all systematic. It's all made in a way that is about profit. That is about these big wigs, basically, that created the system to be this way. Doctors are there to save lives, so they're getting paid a lot of money. Well, teachers are there to save lives as well. They should be getting paid a lot of money as well. Instead of $1 trillion, like $100 trillion or $900 trillion defense bill, maybe $1 trillion to education systems. That sounds great, right? And all this stuff isn't going to happen overnight. We're going to, if people start protesting, there's going to be a lot of issues that come out from that. But knowing that it's for the future, it's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It might not happen within a year, but as we continue to push for this sort of change, as we continue to make that, eventually things are going to be better. Of course, now we have a bunch of people who are crazy and racist and drug and alcohol abusers. They don't know how to interact with people. That's all going to be there. There's awful people around everywhere, and it's probably going to be around for a very long time. But at least the trajectory is going towards a better path. You know, fixing all these things that cause those kind of people. You know, most of the time, people that we do encounter, it's because of this broken system. It's because that there's been racism for such a really long time. It's because they don't have these opportunities in education systems that give them those flashlights that I was talking about, those perspectives that I was mentioning, you know, or don't have these like ways for people to learn and figure out how to interact with each other in order for them not to pursue, let's say, awful jobs or awful ways of making money or whatever else. You know, so that's for the future, really. That's just there's some people who we can't fix now, but what we can fix is what the future is going to be like. You know, what the future generation is going to think like, how they're going to behave, you know, and yeah, a lot of it has to do with that. You can't force parents to act responsibly. That's just not going to happen. But we can pay teachers well and have really good education for teachers, progressive education for teachers, not fascist, abusive type, you know, the ones that are like, oh, the way you go about it is by like punishing them and blah, 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 blah. No, I'm talking about progressive that actually have understanding of psychology and understanding of how to interact with people and so on and so forth. Like having that in play is going to shape the future towards a different trajectory. You know, that's one thing for sure. Having, like as I mentioned, having 5 hours instead of 8 hours gives people time to think about things, you know, instead of being really irritated because they come home and they're already halfway done. Well, not halfway, almost their entire day is gone and they just have a couple of hours. You know, they watch like one series and it's already time for them to get ready for the next day. That, of course, that's going to make people irritated. Of course, that's going to have parents like not invest time in their kids because they want to invest time in themselves. Of course, that's going to happen. And who's going to want to come home, right? And think about all this stuff. Like, how do we fix all these problems? How do we fix all these issues? Who's going to want to do that? Who's going to invest any of their money? Like, I'm getting, you know, political newsletters, and they're saying, hey, you know, invest in our campaign. We're not part of lobbyists and so on and so forth. And I give what I can, but most people aren't going to care for that. They're going to be like, no, I'm barely making money. Why am I going to invest in your campaign right now? And why would they even spend the little time that they have thinking about the stuff that is infuriating? They won't. You know, so we have to have time in order for people to actually contribute and think about this stuff and, you know, figure out all these solutions and still have time to enjoy themselves. Otherwise, corruption is just going to keep on doing what they're doing. You know, nobody's going to bat an eye because they're too busy trying to enjoy themselves with the little amount of time that they do have. And of course, livable wages goes without saying. It's not just about fixing the future, but for themselves, for people to be in a good state of mind, to be happy. Well, right now, it's the complete opposite. You know, that everybody's pissed, irritated, barely paying for the inflation, all that other stuff that's going on. Why would they spend their money on the very people who aren't really doing much to change things, you know. So there's a lot in play, and that those things would really change things around. But don't expect politicians to do it, because again, there's going to be roadblocks every step of the way to ensure that doesn't happen. We have to do it as people. Like, we have to protest, we have to come together, we got to do all that stuff that was done back in 1800s in order for that to happen again. There's absolutely no way, especially now, considering the results, that's ever going to happen. None of those politicians, whether they're wearing a red tie or a blue tie, are going to sign any of that into law. Forget it. Like, if you're hoping on that, if you think that in 4 years that's going to happen, if you think that's going to be a possibility in 2 years, you're just fooling yourself. You're falling into their trap, basically. They want you dependent on them because that gives them the upper hand. They could keep exploiting things. They're like, oh, we're coming closer. Oh, no, not this time. Maybe next year. Meanwhile, they're stuff in their pockets, stuff in the pockets of their special interests, and putting in trillions of dollars into defense bills. Trillions, $100 trillion. Don't think politicians are going to solve these problems. They won't. They're exploiting their position. That's why we have to come together and boot them out. That's why it's in the Constitution, is because the founding fathers anticipated things like that would happen. It's repeated, it's something that they know is bound to happen. And they put that into law. Protesting, freedom of speech, that being protected under law. For these specific reasons, when there's a gridlock, and it's been like that for a while, nothing other than protest is going to get through. There's a lot more other stuff that I'm going to talk about in other streams that have to do with schools, and how a lot of this is also systematic from schools. How a lot of these Nazi values, interaction, it also comes from schools as well. How it's perpetuated from there. But I'm going to save that for another stream. As far as the stream goes, this week, there's going to be some exciting new stuff coming this Wednesday. There's going to be a special intro. It's going to be something new. It's not related to Gil Elfgren, but Gil Elfgren is continuing. It's going to be, I believe, the final stream for Gil Elfgren's influences, the guys that you've been seeing these past month, I'm going to say. This past month and month and a half. That Friday is going to be the final stream for that. There are a few names that I haven't actually covered. I think there are a few names that are being mentioned in the book that I haven't covered yet. So if you guys are interested in seeing more about them as well, leave your comments. Leave comments talking about that. And let me know if you want to see more of it. I'm gonna debate on that myself. I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna see what their work is like, and possibly in the future I'm going to be talking about them more. But yeah, this Friday it's going to be the final stream for the influences, and I'm going to be showing you guys maybe this Friday as well, or the week that follows, the actual book. The reason why I decided to do all this stuff, and just show you guys the years from the 20s all the way up to the 70s of his work. Incredible, beautiful pinup art. So this week is going to be pretty exciting. Wednesday is also going to be a really interesting special special intro. So make sure you tune back in then to see it. See what it is. But if you guys agree with all this stuff, you know, a lot of the stuff that I mentioned, talk about it with your friends. You know, talk about it with other people. Discuss how you're going to do it. You know, there's no way around it. If people are talking you out of it, it's because they're complicit, you know, or they're just too scared, or they support it and they're just covertly pretending as if that wouldn't work. You know, they're trying to talk you out of it. Some people do it for power trips because they want to see if they could influence somebody's point of view. You know, but considering all this stuff and considering the very important point of you don't know what's going to happen, you know, with your life. You don't want it to be that the entire life is just dedicated to serving these greedy, deranged corporations that are backing fascism. You know, you don't want that to be the only thing that your existence is about, because who knows, you know, are you going to get another chance at life? Why should you spend that life serving these deranged people who want to basically exploit you and then kill you off? There are all these other possibilities. There's all these ways to fix problems and issues. None of them are approached. None of them are taken. There are a bunch of excuses made because they don't care about that. They just care about money, power, fame, and that's it. It's a high. It's a high like, I want to say it's similar to this of what we all know, the idea of like gambling. You know, why is that considered to be such a problem? Because it's a high. Once you get on it, it really morphs people's perspective, attitude, outlook, all that stuff. There's so many different things that come into play. You know, there's also, of course, there's people who have been exploited and they had to work their way through all that exploitation, and they feel like if somebody gets it any other way, it's unfair to them. You know, so basically, I want you to experience my misery in order for it to feel right. And that's an unsustainable and crazy way to go about anything. You know, imagine if everybody's just like taking that approach for situations like, oh, I felt this terrible experience, I need you to feel that terrible experience. What kind of a society we would have if everybody took that on board? It's insane. It's an insane trickle-down system. That's fueled by spite, hate, resentment, anger. You know, that's not a sustainable society, and incredibly ignorant and deranged society that's based on this idea. It isn't the fault of the person that the system was so broken. You know, it's not the fault of the people who are trying to live a better life. It's the fault of the system that created that for that person to experience. So if anything, they should be taking out their frustration at the system that did that to them, as opposed to the people who are trying to avoid that same experience. You know, but again, the way that it's made is to fight people against each other. You know, they present these corporations, they present these ideas to others like, is it fair if we forgive student loan debt? Since you had to pay for it and you had to do it? Well, if the system wasn't so exploitive, I wouldn't have had to do it. So really, it's the system at fault. So absolutely, in order to fix that, yeah, it should be forgiven. In order to stop this from happening over and over and over again, you know, to prevent this constant, repetitive nonsense, yeah, we have to tackle the system. So there's multiple schools of thought that will go into it. All of them are misled. You know, some people intentionally don't want you to, because again, as I mentioned, they want you to be a wage slave. It makes them rich. They don't have to share anything. You know, they don't have to share the limelight. You know, if their entire philosophy is a Nazi philosophy, the survival of the fittest, they're going to want to see you below. You know, it's another sickness that comes from arrogance. Getting off on seeing other people below them makes them feel better about their insecurities. All these toxic philosophies that don't solve anything other than just ego stroke. And those people want to perpetuate it because they don't want to change. They just want to take everybody down, you know, or bring them below them so that they won't have to change. Brat syndrome. That's exactly what brats act like. It's a mental disorder. And why perpetuate it when we can create a better future? Anyways, everybody, that's my rant for today. That's my political rant. Join me tomorrow. I'm going to be back again doing figure drawing basics. And also going to be doing a project stream, which is going to be painting. I'm going to be doing some digital oil painting, which I'm looking forward to as well. That's tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here at the Art Lounge Alley. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. If you did, just remember to hit the like and subscribe button. And I will see you tomorrow.